So how likely is foreign interference in this country's elections, specifically next year's federal vote? Yesterday, I spoke to the new head of Elections Canada, Stéphane Perrault, about that, but we began our conversation talking about proposed electoral reforms. Hi, Mr. Perrault. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. So I have to start off by asking you about these electoral changes, potential changes that the government introduced through legislation. The bill didn't pass before the House rose for the summer. You had warned in previous testimony to committee that could be an issue in implementing the changes. Where do things stand right now? Will you, at this point, be able to implement the set of changes that they introduced, given that the bill has not passed?
Well, let me take this one step back. I do think it's important for parliamentarians to scrutinize electoral legislation. It's important legislation. And I always felt that it's important to have cross-party support on key aspects of electoral legislation. So they need to do what they need to do, and I need to prepare on my side for any possibility.
So what does that mean? That you are prepared for the bill to pass, or how are you prepared?
So we're planning for the next election based on the current rules, but we're also starting to plan based on what if this bill passes. So we have to do contingency planning.
How will you know in what form the bill passes, though? Because if they do what you just said and listen to the opposition, there are some parts of the bill that the opposition has a big problem with. So if those, how do you know what the bill in its final form will be, and therefore how do you properly prepare for implementing it?
You don't know, but what we do know is that large segments of the bill reflect recommendations from M. Meran, my predecessor, that have been unanimously endorsed by all parties in the Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. So there's a fairly solid component in that bill. There are issues for which there is disagreement, and we're following that closely, and we'll adjust as we go.
Can you give us an example of each? So something that will be you will very easily be able to implement because of your predecessor's recommendations?
Well, there's a range of measures in the bill to modernize the electoral process, to give us some flexibility on how we design the procedures at the polls, and we've known that for a while. And these are discretionary powers, so we can take advantage or not of some of that discretion, some of that flexibility. So we can adjust either way. There are new rules that were not in the CO's recommendations. For example, pre-writ spending limits, yes. Much more extensive regime on third parties. And
the pre-writ spending is the thing that the opposition has a bit of.
That's one issue. There's also the issue of privacy rules. Should parties be subject to privacy rules or not? So currently the bill has very little on that, and I've made recommendations in committee. I think, and I agree with the Privacy Commissioner on that. I think parties have a lot of data. Canadians, I think, need to know that parties are subject to very basic privacy rules.
So just so that I have some clarity before I move on to another topic,
sure.
Because this is a political subject as well. If the bill, when does the bill have to be passed for you to implement it in its entirety?
So we are preparing for the implementation. So we are looking at what needs to be done towards that implementation. Obviously, as we move forward, the runway gets shorter and shorter. I think it will become a bit more difficult after the new year if it's not passed.
Okay, thanks. So I want to move on to the idea of voter turnout. I want to get you're officially new in the role, though you've been in it for a few years now, unofficially. But I know 2015 was kind of a high point as far as turnout was concerned. But otherwise, it's hovered around 60% for the last 20 years. Do you think that Canada has a problem with voter turnout?
This is not just Canada, but I should say that it has increased, not just at the last election. So there seems to be a trend, an upward trend, and there's an upward trend in youth voting as well. So that's encouraging. And there's also a narrowing of the gap between voting on reserve and voting in the general population. So there's a number of fairly healthy trends in the system. But that is not unique to Canada.
Mm-hmm. So is there a role, in the next election, for example, is there something that Elections Canada is going to do differently than it's done in the past to try and encourage that trend to continue?
I think our first priority is, first of all, to make sure Canadians know how and when and where to register and vote. That's the first priority. And second is to make sure that there are no administrative barriers. We want an inclusive electoral system, and we want to reduce lineups, improve the voting experience so that those who do come will come again at the next election. That's the core of our mandate.
Given your experience and from your perspective, are there things outside the box that the government or that Canadians should be looking at? Things like, I think you've entertained the option before of lowering the voting age, There is a lot of discussion around online voting. What do you think about those?
I mean, these are policy issues for Parliament to decide on. These are not
But you've got a
issues.
lot of experience. You're the expert.
Well, there is no expertise in issues like how young should Canadians be to vote. These are policy questions for which there's no right and wrong answers, and this is for Parliament to look into.
Do you think it's worth them considering
I think
lowering the voting age or looking? I know online voting has been looked at and kind of dismissed, but taking a look again.
I think if they want to have that conversation, my role is to support that conversation, bring some data, and support that conversation. But it's really for Parliament to have that discussion.
Okay, another thing Parliament is looking at, but I do want to get your take on, is the idea of foreign interference and the possibility of it in our next election, given what we've seen occur in the American election. How concerned are you, from your vantage point, about foreign interference?
I think we have to be concerned about that. There are various aspects of it. It's not a simple issue. Whether it's cyber attacks we need to prepare for, whether it's foreign funding through third parties, whether it's misinformation or disinformation. So there's a range of issues that we're looking into and we need to be prepared for.
What role does Elections Canada have in preparing for that?
So we have several roles, and we're not the only ones who have a role to play here, but we do have a key role, first of all, in making sure our systems are secure. So over the last couple of years, we've invested significant effort in restructuring our databases, improving our systems. We've worked very closely with the Communications Security Establishment and other security partners. We're fortunate in Canada we can have that working relationship with security partners, and so we collaborate with them on that. So that's a first role. In terms of disinformation, certainly media, traditional media have an important role to play. I was encouraged to see that if you look at the stats starting from the presidential election, trust in social media content has gone down, and trust in traditional media and institution has gone up. So that, to me, is a healthy sign of skepticism. Canadians are learning from what's happening elsewhere. But we have a role to play. Our main role, as I said, is informing Canadians on where, when, and how to register and vote, and making sure that if there is misinformation or disinformation out there, that we monitor it and that we react to it.
How do you react? How do you police that? Isn't that the concern that a lot of parliaments, I guess, or governments around the world are kind of dealing with?
Yeah, there's many things that we can do. First of all, we can push out information, and we can use many tools to do that. Social media, traditional media, our website. So there are many tools that we push out information. We work with groups who work with Canadians, so we have trusted partners. But at the next election, we'll have a repertoire on our website of all our communications. So if somebody hears something that looks like it's coming from Elections Canada but is not sure, they'll be able to check on our website, is that an Elections Canada communication or not? And so we need to be out there and be known as the trusted source of information on that kind of basic, where, when, and how to register and vote.
Do you think, though, the Canadian election will be targeted?
We don't know that, but we do have to be prepared for it.
Because the government says that we likely will be. So you think we don't know at this point?
Well, nobody knows for sure. I think it's prudent to prepare for that.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot, Mr. Perrault.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.